Thanks for coming out, guys. First show of hands, who has an Amazon Alexa or Google Home? All right. And who has created something for Amazon Alexa or Google Home? Great. So what I wanted to talk about tonight was there's obviously a lot of talk about voice and what voice means. And when we hear voice, we think of Amazon Alexa, but we're actually in the middle of this huge shift in digital interaction, and it's going to impact what we all do every day. So I want to sort of give everybody a crash course in what the voice ecosystem looks like right now, and then what that means for design and what that means for design process. A little bit of background about myself. I'm a designer, developer, and have run product teams at big companies, small companies. I'd founded a startup called Cytor. We got acquired by Groupon. I was the head of product at Groupon, and then left to get started on a few different projects that led to voice, and got really excited about the potential of different voice platforms. But having a career in product, I'm used to tools and a process. We go through wireframing, we go through visual design, we go through prototyping, we do user testing, we do all of these things and we iterate and design prior to development, and voice had none of that yet. So that led to the creation of Sayspring, and Sayspring is collaborative design software for voice applications. We're starting with Amazon Alexa and Google Home, but the idea is that as voice becomes more pervasive across different mediums, we're going to need a set of tools to figure out what user experiences should be like. Sayspring lets you create a full voice user experience, choose all the speech that's part of it, and then actually interact with it on any Amazon Alexa, Google Home device, or within Sayspring, with no need to code anything, no need to deploy anything. What we're not building is sort of the Squarespace of voice. The idea is, how do we remove all the technical limitations of working with voice as a medium so that we can facilitate a proper design process for design teams and for product teams. So to talk a little bit about what voice means, and that it's more than Alexa, it's more than chatbots, a few of the things that are going on when you think about voice. So we have devices, so we have your Amazon Echo devices, your Google Home devices, maybe the greatest product name in the history of digital products, the Ling Long Ding Dong, which is a voice assistant in China. Alibaba actually just released a voice assistant. Baidu released a voice assistant in China. So there's a lot of different devices that are happening, and a lot of them are connected to these different platforms. So you have Amazon Alexa as a platform, Google Assistant as a platform, Cortana, and for the majority of these, you also have an app ecosystem that's surrounding that platform. So Alexa calls it a skill, Google calls it an action, Cortana also calls it a skill. SiriKit is still getting her act together. There's about 8 pre-baked actions you can put into Siri. Our view is that it's going to open up. But what's super interesting is that all these companies are also taking all of the services that drive these platforms and releasing them as individual cloud services that you can integrate into different applications. So IBM has their Watson platform that has a bunch of speech to text, text to speech, a bunch of different machine learning. Amazon has released Polly, which is their text to speech. They've released Lex, which is essentially the brains behind Alexa. And because of all these different services, you can create native voice experiences that we're already seeing popping up across different industries like healthcare, entertainment, wearables. There's a bunch more platforms that are coming out. Samsung is working on Bixby sort of as we speak. And our view of the world is that everybody is going to have access to the world's best voice technology for pennies, the way we all have access to the world's best infrastructure through AWS for pennies. And so the question is, with those services, what kind of product experiences do we build, and sort of what comes out of that? Voice is going to impact every area of digital design. What's super exciting is to see the enthusiasm among consumers and users with Amazon Alexa. Amazon Alexa is already in like 12 or 13% of US households. It took the PC 10 years to get there. Amazon Alexa launched about 2 years ago. The Prime Day that just happened about a week ago, I think there was 3.7 million Echo devices got sold in a day. And this doesn't include Google Assistant, which is rolling out to every single Android, Marshmallow, and Nougat, which is about 400 million devices. Cortana is already in 100 million Windows 10 installations. So these are huge numbers and huge footprints that already exist. And so what's going to happen is as more of us use Alexa, and it seems like a toy, and it's, we set timers and we listen to music, but it's also going to change expectations and user behavior of what you can do and what you should be able to talk to. So we have these dedicated devices, and they sit in kitchens, and the show has come out and sort of brings that voice assistant experience to us. When we look at sort of how people are using it, it is music, it is timers. I don't know how we all lived without timers as a big part of our daily lives until the Echo came out. But I'm a big fan of the timer. I also use it with my daughter. So I give her 2 minutes until something's done and say, hey, Alexa says. But what's amazing is that 14% of people are already shopping through Amazon Alexa. 6% of people are paying bills through Alexa. One of the things that we've seen at Sayspring, which is super surprising, is that one of the big verticals using it is financial services. So different investment banks, retail banking are all using Sayspring to sort of figure out what these voice applications are going to be. Especially in the world of retail banking, Capital One was one of the first people to put a skill out there. And for them, it's really an opportunity to extend the relationship with the customer into the home. We sort of wonder why there's still a branch on every corner. It's because sort of people bank with who's close to them. And this is an opportunity for them to get a little bit closer. But voice is becoming a huge part of mobile as well. I don't know who here has the fancy AirPods, but they bring the lackluster power of Siri right into your ear. But when you look at sort of the behavior around mobile, 39% of all smartphone owners use voice recognition software, use voice search on an almost daily basis. And that's across all smartphone owners. When you look at that number for 18 to 24-year-olds, it's in like the mid-40s. When you look at that for teenagers, it's actually in the mid-50s. So this is a behavior that sort of younger people are taking as just sort of racing through mobile. Google has identified this as a big focus for them in figuring out sort of, in a world of voice search, what does their ad model look like? That entire business, 97% of their income is driven from AdWords, and that's about to change. And they're already seeing that 20% of all mobile queries on Android platforms are voice searches. So this is behavior that people are already picking up, and sometimes those responses are audio-based, and sometimes they're also screen-based. Sometimes there's no audio that comes back, and it's just a Google search. But it's pretty incredible to see that behavior. What's even odder, and sort of as I got excited about voice and looked into it, I kind of didn't believe these numbers at first. But voice is already becoming pretty big on desktop. So Cortana has 100 million active monthly users. When Windows 10 rolled out, there was a search bar for Cortana across the bottom, and you could actually talk to it. 25% of all of those searches are already voice. So people are talking to their desktop computers. And it's not hard to see how sort of that's going to hit every website they visit. That's going to hit every application they use on the desktop. So as a designer, you're going to need to start thinking about how do you deal with those different modalities. When are people clicking? When are people tapping on a phone? And when are people actually talking to something? Google Analytics also just announced that they are going to be supporting voice commands in Google Analytics across web and mobile. So you're going to be able to open Google Analytics on the web and ask, hey, how many visitors did we have last week? And so you're not going to need to navigate through the UI to figure out how to pull those numbers. As designers, we spend so much of our time sort of figuring out how do we help users find what it is they're looking for? How do we provide context of where they are within our application? How do we help them build sort of a mental model of what our application looks like? And now voice sort of provides a shortcut to a lot of this stuff, which sort of brings in this idea of multimodality. When do we drive people towards talking to something? How do we anticipate when a visual response is required and when it just complements an experience? How many experiences can be voice first or voice only versus complemented with a screen? This little bad boy came out about 6-7 weeks ago, the Echo Show. And what's interesting about the Echo Show is that every Amazon Alexa skill, there's now over 15,000 of them, also works on the show. So back in sort of 2008, 2009, when we were creating websites, we had to answer the question, well, what does this look like on web? Now every person who's creating Amazon Alexa skill needs to ask, what does this look like on show? So even though it's going to be a smaller footprint of overall device owners, it becomes a consideration that now everybody working on voice skills is going to need to figure out. What's interesting is Amazon or Google has also started to sell Google Home bundled with a Chromecast. So they are making a play in the next couple months to release a lot more integration between that. It's kind of interesting to see the different approaches everybody's taking. Amazon is putting out a screen. Google's trying to use the screen that we all already have in our houses to sort of mix those different things and decide sort of when do you talk to something, when do you show something. And this has gotten very little coverage, but I think it's going to be massively impactful. So Title III of the ADA states that public facilities, commercial facilities need to be accessible to everyone regardless of disability. So this is why there are ramps in movie theaters. And WinnDixie is a supermarket chain throughout the South primarily. They just lost a case that was brought by a blind plaintiff because their website wasn't accessible on a screen reader. And when you and the argument on WinnDixie's side was that it was an undue burden to have 10% of our web budget dedicated to the accessibility efforts, and the courts decided that they didn't believe that's an undue burden. And so what that does is now there's a legal requirement that your site needs to be accessible. But the way we do accessibility is pretty broken. What we do is we create a visual display, and then we have a screen reader read what is being visually displayed, which is a very broken way to do design. Between what's happening in the voice ecosystem and between sort of the accessibility community, we're going to see native voice become a thing. We should get rid of screen readers. We should have native voice experiences for those populations. And it also is going to bring 12% of households that have these devices with them. So this is going to sort of change how our design organizations start to look. We're going to have web teams, we're going to have mobile teams, and we're going to have voice teams as well. And part of that voice will be sort of the way we think about responsive design in web and what that looks like on mobile web. Some of that's going to be across different platforms. So in the same way we have Android teams and we have iPhone teams, we're going to have Alexa teams, we're going to have Google Assistant teams. And so we're going to sort of need to figure out how does this experience play out in all these different areas. And we're going to have a dedicated staff to figure out the different voice elements of it. There are probably 2,000 people in the country who have a lot of experience doing voice, who've been buried in companies like Nuance for the last 10 or 12 years. So the voice designers are going to be the people in this room. In the same way we learned mobile when it came out, we're going to learn voice as well, and we're going to have to figure out how to blend those different interactions. Copywriting is going to become a much bigger part of this process. A lot of people who are involved in conversational design are also bringing in script writers and screenwriters and sort of figuring out like what's that conversational flow look like back and forth. So it's going to change the way our product organizations need to be created. And it's going to need to change the process that we use to figure out all these different things. So, when we think about sort of what the 6 different disciplines of traditional UX are, in some contexts, people have audio design in there sort of as now a 7th. And our belief is that it's going to need to become a core part of all digital product design. Audio design really being about speech, sort of what's the verbal part of that interaction. But also, what is sound design? We're just sort of getting to see people integrating sound and ear cons much better into voice experiences. So an ear con is a distinct sound that indicates something's happening without actually saying it. So if anyone has AirPods and you've ever heard the sound of like the battery going down, like you know what that means even though it didn't say the battery is going down. If you've ever heard the 3 chimes of NBC, you all know that that means NBC, even though they didn't say, hey, you're watching NBC. So ear cons, sort of, different sounds for success, for errors, and sort of what that sound design component looks like as part of overall audio design is going to become a much bigger part of what we all do. So voice technology is something we've talked about for, 50 years. It was in Star Trek in the 60s, and now the technology is caught up. The success, the recognition rates around 95, 96%. I think human beings are like 97%. So the technology is there, but we think that design is holding it back. So designers haven't really been part of the process. And a lot of even the Amazon Alexa skills we see out there now have been created in flat text documents that engineers then brought to life. But designers haven't really been empowered to have voice as a medium to work through the process, to do proper user testing, and to iterate. So our belief is that design shall set voice free, that once designers come into this, voice will sort of live up to the potential that the technology has already brought there. That's it.
Thank you very much. Time for questions.
This is just something I've always wondered that I've noticed. I have to say, whenever someone goes to something on their phone, like voice command, if they had like a different dialect or if they spoke a different language and English isn't their first one, they have a much harder time using those services. How do you think design is going to accommodate for that? And do you at Sayspring have something that kind of like you can test it?
Yeah, so all of these different platforms all handle sort of the voice recognition piece of this process. So Sayspring is essentially a tool that sits on top of them. We are not in the voice business. We are not in the NLP business. We use all these different cloud services and sort of create collaborative workflow management tools on top of it. So when it comes to certain accents and these platforms are getting better, the reason voice is improving so rapidly now is that it's really a function of big data sets and machine learning. And with this many people using these platforms, they're getting better and better. And the machine learning is sort of what is letting us take these big data sets and improve them. So they continue to get better, and Sayspring lets you get access to Alexa and Google Assistant so you can figure out those things, so you can figure out what good invocation names work. One of the big debates in design, and it's something I could go on a rant about, is whether or not voice assistants are actually going to talk like humans. A lot of people sort of talk about that that's the goal, that we're going to interact with these voice assistants the way we would talk to another person. I personally don't think that's true. I think what's going to happen is that we're all going to develop a different way of speaking to voice assistants. We're going to over-enunciate. Some people are going to speak much, much faster, the same way different people have different typing speeds. We're going to start to see sort of industry-specific interfaces for voice that are a whole bunch of different short codes. So in the same way a courtroom stenographer has a different kind of keyboard that they type on, there are going to be different industries that have different commands and different ways to say things that are much more efficient. So I think what's interesting is the sort of the human piece will be sort of the mass market, but then I think that there's going to be sort of these specialized semantic interfaces that start to pop up in different places that are just way more efficient.
Do you see voice technology surpassing that sort of mental block we have, for example, when calling customer service lines, always pressing zero for operator and not wanting to deal with the robotic voice?
Yeah, so the two worst things that could have ever happened from a PR standpoint to voice interfaces is the IVR system. So like we've all called American Airlines and said like reservations, reservations, reservations. And Siri, which is terrible. It was released way, way too early. We should not all have Siri in our pockets. And we were sort of told that Siri could do anything, and she could do like 15 things. And Amazon Alexa was given to us and was like, it can give you a timer. And we're like, this is magic. So I think it depends a lot on sort of what those expectations are. I kind of forgot your question. I kind of was ranting about Siri. Just repeat the question real quick.
It's kind of just like, do you see, in your opinion, do you see voice technology as a whole kind of breaking that mental block that we have that we always have to press?
Oh, yes, about IVR systems. These are the two things that get me all worked up. So I actually think if you had the experience of, if you knew Joe at American Airlines, and he knew you really well, and he handled all your travel, and you knew you could call Joe personally, and he would take care of whatever you needed, you would love to get on the phone with American Airlines. But in a customer service support center where it's all driven by human beings, that's not possible. right? But if we can all have sort of individual voice assistants that have full access to our account, that know all of those things, that know all of the context, that I can ask it can ask me a question, and I can hang up, and I can call back 2 days later and pick up that conversation exactly where I left off, we would all love that experience, right? And so voice assistants, voice interfaces is going to drive that to happen. And so I actually think the whole idea of talking to American Airlines is going to be this delightful experience that we do through Amazon Echo, it's that we do when we call on a phone number. And I think that sort of the using voice for those things is actually going to become very pleasant and much better than going on a website or going on a chat interface.
So if you're designing a new voice application and there's a few different services available right now, and they're all very new and they're competing and Siri sucks, but there's three decent ones. For specific applications, how do you pick which service to go with, and how many other new services do you think are going to pop up?
Yeah, so to sort of break it out into so there's platform, right? So you would have Amazon Alexa, Google Home, where are you going to build that stuff? Or if you're building some sort of native voice experience, sort of what cloud service are you going to use? Across all the big tech companies, they're all relatively the same from a recognition standpoint and from sort of a strength of platform standpoint. A big part of it is also going to be voice, right? Of what is the actual voice that you want to represent your brand or your company. It's really interesting to sort of see what Alexa's doing, what Google Assistant's doing. Alexa has this concept of a skill. It's always her voice. When I build an application, I'm teaching her something. She becomes smarter and then capable of doing that thing. Google Assistant has taken an operator model. When I open up an application on Google Assistant, it says, now talking to Sayspring, and it's a different voice. And there are different voices that you can choose for that experience. What I also think is going to happen is that as custom voice models can get built, in the same way, Mike Rowe is the voice of Ford, Mike Rowe's voice is going to be the voice of Ford on a voice assistant, right? And sort of the way brands think about what that customer interaction is and how they're represented. I think the whole idea of custom voices is going to become super important. So part of it is right now sort of, is the platform easy to work with? If it's one of the big companies, it's sort of well-baked. There's varying degrees of documentation across Amazon and Google, and Microsoft's Cortana documentation leaves a lot to be desired. But I think it's primarily a function of what you want to sound like.
How do you think that the kind of proliferation and more normal becoming of voice interactions affects things like half the people in this room right now are texting somebody. We were probably all texting somebody as we walked here. We're probably texting or IMing our partners all day at work. And if voice becomes a much more normal thing, you think we just become a world where everybody's just saying, yeah, so I've got that doctor's appointment later tonight in front of a bunch of strangers, or does everybody wear headphones, or how do you think that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I think headphones like AirPods start to change that behavior. Frankly, walking down the street and texting is a terrible idea, and you should really never do it, right? And we do it because it's easier than calling somebody. If you could just transcribe a message and sort of have it going back and forth, I think that would happen. Before we all started texting, we all had cell phones, and all of a sudden we were all, talking in places. I think the way to sort of think about voice is not so much, texting versus voice, but it's the conversations we already have, the way we use phones, a lot of that behavior, a lot of that, societal norms will come out of that. I wouldn't use a voice interface on the Long Island Railroad. Plenty of people scream into their cell phone on the Long Island Railroad, right? So it's sort of, there are going to be people who are obnoxious about it. There are going to be people who aren't obnoxious about it. One of the things that I think is really weird is the idea that if you give somebody a cell phone to talk to Siri, they hold it like this, and it comes out like this, as opposed to just talking like this. I'm you don't know if somebody's on the phone with a voice assistant or a person, right? So I think that behavior is going to change. I think you're going to see interacting with voice assistants look a lot more like phone calls.
Time for one last question.
Do you see the future of voice being, you mentioned brands all having their own voice system, or more like moving her, where we all have our own system and deals with all those things?
Yeah, that's sort of the Alexa versus Google Assistant question, right? I don't know how that plays out. I think it partly plays out based on a few other things that are happening. Amazon is being a lot more aggressive and a lot smarter about rolling out a voice platform than Google is. And I think they are going to push that metaphor, and that metaphor might become sort of the way it works. There's also the idea, like, do two voice assistants talk to one another? So does my voice assistant talk to the American Airlines voice assistant and like figure that out? Like, do they become sort of these voice-based APIs that connect with one another? I think it's gonna, I think it's gonna be interesting to see the way it plays out. I think brands also, they're gonna want it to be in their voice. I think if I was, a brand manager, I'd be really concerned about what a voice world looks like. We didn't even touch on the whole idea of voice interface optimization. Like the same way we all had to think about SEO and content, we're gonna need to think about the way all these names work together. So I will end with a quick little pitch. Oh, you want one more question? Yeah.
Thanks. So a lot of the web stuff is at this point relatively straightforward, but how far does AI and speech recognition have to advance before voice visually is going to make some sense?
Yeah, I mean, so I think, this is where I think voice means a lot of different things, right? So voice means a method of input. Talking is 3 times more efficient than typing. You can actually listen much faster than you can read. So just making sort of voice interfaces that interact with different things, regardless of sort of the AI behind them, I think becomes pretty popular. And then as far as sort of the AI, a lot of AI is sort of really just if-thens, right? All of programming is really just if-thens. And so there's still a lot that can be done. When you start to think about the way we can tie this all together, I took a car ride this weekend and I was coming up with a GW and I didn't know what the toll was. Like, I should be able to ask Alexa, like, what that toll is. Like, all that stuff is already there, right? It's really just stitching all this stuff together and like building a good experience on top of it. So the amount that we can get done in digital product before the limitations of AI become the blocking factor is so vast that I think that AI is going to just continue to not be the problem.
I'm going to go a little before that, though, because basically if speech recognition doesn't work, then it's not more efficient, it's more frustrating, the expectations change, right? When you type on the keyboard, when you type a letter, it's generally a letter. So I'm saying if you don't get speech rec right, then...
So yeah, to break apart those two pieces, so speech recognition is great right now, right? It's like the best it's ever been. We've made more progress in the last 2 years than we did like the 10 before. So speech recognition is great. When you talk to Alexa and she doesn't know what to do, that's not because she didn't know what you said, right? Like, she just doesn't know what to do with that command. And so as we sort of build out all these applications that back up behind it, it's going to seem like she's much smarter, but that's really a function of building out functionality behind an interface that's sort of already working, right? Cool.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, the only thing I'll end on, so we have free plans for Sayspring if you go create them. The welcome email comes from my personal email account. So if anyone creates an account and you have questions, feel free to hit me up.